These are book notes for Everything is Effed, a book about hope by Mark Manson. If you haven't seen his previous book, Subtle Art, you probably weren't paying attention because it's everywhere. It is that book with the orange cover. Anyway, that book is, the subtitle of that is A Counterintuitive Approach to Living a Good Life, and he talks about kind of this a different approach to self-development from what you often see with positivity and other things like that with self-help, and that the argument is kind of like not trying to aim for a life without struggle. I'm just going to do some notes as I go along, make a few videos about this book. I'm through the first couple chapters, so one of the ideas is to start with nihilism and build towards hope. He says this is not a nihilism book, it is anti-nihilism, but that said, similar to his previous book, where Subtle Art, you don't want to just ignore that the current state of affairs, that there is you can't really have hope if you think that if you are delusional and just think everything is perfect as it is right now. So building towards hope gives you a sense of progress and can help you achieve satisfaction and happiness. For example, in a few podcast episodes, he's been doing a lot of podcast interviews, he talks about the success that Subtle Art had. It's one of the most successful books of the decade, probably, as far particularly in nonfiction. He had all these goals as an author, then thought it was going to take his entire career to hit these goals, but he did it all with one book. So you hit your dream, you make it to your dream, and now what do you hope for? You have nothing to hope for. But once he started working on this book, it gave him some hope, and something that was driving him, and he mentions it in this book, is that there is hope that this book might help some people. He's not hoping to have as successful a book as his previous one, which was just wildly wide. It can't be really overstated how wildly successful that book was. So the three things that will help you get towards hope and get to a good place are control, value, and community, and he says that these things work together. If you have two of the three, then it can be good to work on the other to have that total package. I will get to that. He talks about the paradox of progress, that as a society progresses and becomes more prosperous, the hope of the individuals can start to decrease, where we see an increase. We have all this technology, you'd think things would be great. You can order food and it's at your door in less than an hour, with a few taps of your phone. And I don't know that that's the best sign of progress, but we are, as things get more prosperous, there are increasing numbers of loneliness, or increasing levels of loneliness and increasing levels of depression. He talks about hope being this thing that's in the future that can be something where you can continue to make progress, because as you make progress, then you see less of a you see a slower rate of progress, and then that makes your hope lower. That's a paradox of progress. He talks about that self-control is an illusion, and gets into the idea of the feeling brain and the thinking brain. He tells a story where someone has basically his brain his skull is drilled into. Some parts of the brain are scooped out. This sounds pretty nuts, just saying it out loud, but it was a fairly common procedure. Well, I mean, common compared to now. It's not like they were doing this to anyone that walked into the hospital or anything. But it was this procedure to he tells a story of someone that happened to, that person was able to reason about and think and get through life, but he just couldn't feel anything. And that's, he couldn't feel any good emotions, he couldn't feel bad emotions, he just kind of floated through life, still able to, again, he could solve problems and his memories fine, he just had no feelings. And yeah, his emotional capacity was damaged. So it's an introduction to the importance of these different sides of your thinking, the emotional brain and the feeling brain, where he talks about this classical assumption that it's all your fault and that you are in control of yourself completely, that the bad decisions that you make are, again, just your fault, you should have thought through it better. And that's not quite the case. And that's not quite the case because you can separate, again, like, oh, you should have thought this through more. And the thing is that you can think certain situations through and still make the wrong decisions. So there are different metaphors for this in different cultures. So another one that I've heard previously, I think probably reading about Buddhism and meditation, is that you have the rider and the elephant, where the rider is the thinking brain. You can try to steer the elephant, and sometimes that works, but sometimes the elephant is just going to go do what it wants. Another way to think of this is a more modern version is someone driving a car, and then the passenger being kind of a backseat driver. So the passenger is the thinking brain, that you can in some way from the passenger seat influence the driver, but not entirely. The driver is still in charge, the feeling brain is still in charge. So it can be important to appeal to those emotions when you are planning different things out, trying to change your behavior. I thought it was pretty interesting on the Sam Harris podcast, where he had Daniel Kahneman on. Daniel Kahneman wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and just one of the most accomplished researchers in behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, with his research partner Amos Tversky. And so he's a world-class mind as far as it comes to this, and he just knows so much about it. But he even said that just because he has that level of knowledge, it doesn't actually change his behavior all that much, because it is that thing, like, his thinking brain is very strong, knows when, so can probably recognize when something is irrational, but it doesn't stop the feeling brain from thinking irrationally in the first place. I like to use this example of appealing to your thinking brain using logic and all of that versus your feeling brain, in that when it comes to fitness, your thinking brain, you can take it, I would guess the majority of people, like, you can read all the science about how physical fitness is good for you, exercise is good for you, and all that logic, but you still might not wake up and work out the next day, because you've done nothing really to feel like doing it. But a lot of people watch a Rocky montage, training montage, and that appeals very strongly to the emotional brain, the feeling brain, and I think more people have gone for a run because they were motivated by watching Rocky. I have no science to back this up, or like studies, but yeah, I think more people have gone for a run watching Rocky than they have reading science books about fitness. Now, again, yeah, so using that car, there is another car example is the consciousness car, and then the clown car, where the clown car can sometimes take over. He talks about cult leaders and the power of this, where the cult leaders will try to make the cult turn off their thinking brain and just go on emotions. And then in the last 100 years, this is talking about like prosperity, that in the last 100 years, lots more people are in prosperity or have higher levels of prosperity. They have lots of time to think, plenty of time to think. And then this leads to that feeling of, those feelings of loneliness, a little too much thinking. And it can be to the point that you have too much thinking, and it can be frustrating because you know that you try to think through a problem, and you get kind of stuck in this loop because just thinking itself isn't going to change things. And then you can see that, you just go in that cycle that the behavior doesn't change. You feel bad about that. Still can't change your behavior. The thing is that we often don't really practice. Most people don't have a lot of practice talking to their feeling brain. This is a good thing because it means that there's a lot of upside. Everyone's a beginner in a way. And similar to like starting out with weights, there's going to be some beginner gains. And the more practice you have at it, the better you'll get. If you imagine again, going to that elephant metaphor, the first time you ride an elephant, probably won't have a lot of success steering it. At no point will you completely control the elephant. You can't warg into it, but you can ride it and you can get better at it. Then you will be able to better communicate with the feeling brain. Going back to Daniel Kahneman, he does say that a good thing about having that knowledge is he probably does have more awareness. So if you don't have any awareness that you're thinking illogically, then it's going to be very hard to fix it. But if you are conscious of that, then you can have some control. You can control the map. This note that I have here, you're the topographer. So these things will happen. You will be able to look at that and decide how to frame it. You'll be able to better go with the flow with your feeling brain and not try to fight it, because it's pretty good at fighting back. Then I just started the 3rd chapter, so I'm going to do a video after this, and I do want to do some notes on, and I don't know if it's going to be exactly this style, but some notes on the rest of the book. But I'll start here as a little bit of a teaser, because I wrote the notes here and then ran out of space. Newton's laws of emotion. This is a play on, of course, Newton's laws of motion, but he does start with the story of Isaac Newton, and just like this terrible childhood that he had, where his father died when he was 7 years old, and then his mom abandoned him, and he was just passed from family member to family member. And there's this quote where I think he wrote this in his journal: "I'm a little fellow, pale and weak." So so he uses this to introduce emo Newton, where 3 laws of emotion. So the first one: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, emotional reaction. What he says here is, I heard this example on one of the podcast interviews he did. If he reached across the table and punched the host, that is one action. The host would probably take an equal and opposite reaction and probably punch him back, or in some way try to physically harm him in self-defense, but there's going to be that kind of reaction. And that's that for right now. I will, again, continue on with these notes, but check this book out. It's a good one, by Mark Manson. And hit subscribe to get the future episodes. Thanks a lot.